I'm probably gonna have my sunglasses and hat on a lot of the times. I feel like I'm wearing a disguise, so just pardon me, you know how the sun is out here. I'd like to make a slight correction in the introduction. I am not the founder of Columbine, and I am very honored to have the founder here in our midst, Sarah Musil, right there. Raise your hand, Sarah. So Sarah founded Columbine 17 years before I purchased it from her in 2015. And I'm just really honored to be a part of the lineage that she started. So, okay, let's see. Another thing I wanted to mention along the lines of my own introduction is that I did a permaculture internship at a farm in Ohio for a summer during college in 1995. And we did not demonstrations, like hands-on like activities with this organic vegetable farm all summer long. But we also had concerted classes, like class time, learning about permaculture. And I was a young person then, and it was funny, like preparing for this talk today and revisiting a lot of the things about what permaculture is and how it works. I realized how much the permaculture ethics and principles just got intertwined with how I view life, and obviously then also landscaping and design. And it was good to realize that and to be able to put this into words and reclaim it. It's something that Columbine, since I've been in charge, has always done. We just haven't really put that stamp on it and said, hey, we do permaculture. But now it's time to do that because we've been doing it all along anyway. So anyway, I'm really excited to share it with you all because it is near and dear to my heart. And I want to ask, just for a brief raise of hands, how many people feel familiar with permaculture at all? Great. And how many of you are surprised to see it associated with ornamental horticulture? I think for some people it's a new thing. Even I think I had a little departure from it when I started doing ornamental horticultural as opposed to vegetable gardening, because I learned to think about it in terms of chickens and crops, and the reference of permanent agriculture is one place its name comes from, but also it comes from permanent culture just as much. And that's how I really embrace it. And we're gonna just step a few steps over this way toward the gardens. And I walked around the gardens and the other day, right before it rained a little bit, incidentally, and I did some chalk labels on some things that I wanted to talk to you all about, and also as a reminder to myself. And so one of the things that I feel like is really important about gardens, and this garden is no exception, and it actually epitomizes it, nurturing nature, including us as humans. We are part of nature, and we are animals too, even if we don't always act like it. To me, that's what gardens are meant to do, and that's what permaculture is all about, is integrating us back into nature. So for those of you who either know or don't know, permaculture can be boiled down, as far as a definition, as a design system for creating sustainable human environments. It addresses plants and animals. So in the way that we talk about it a lot in landscaping around here anyway, is the animals we talk about are wildlife, like creating wildlife habitat, and pollinators. But it does very much focus on humans being comfortable in the environments we create with permaculture and landscaping too, as well as infrastructures. So infrastructures can be, our buildings or water harvesting, which we'll talk about more later, but I talk about it a lot, so I'm trying not to talk about only that this time. For any of you who've seen me talk before, you know I like to talk about that. So the focus in permaculture is really the relationships between these elements, plants, animals, structures, infrastructure, and how we place them together in the landscape. Can everyone hear me okay? Feel free to come closer if you're having any trouble. So to get all together, this permacultural system creates a cultivated ecology, and that's what we're trying to do. The ethic, there are permaculture principles and there are permaculture ethics, and the ethics embrace the care of the earth, the care of people through cooperation and not competition. That's really a core idea for the humans and the plants, and the relationship between all the elements is how can we get them to cooperate and collaborate rather than compete. And I think a really simple way of embracing the idea of what permaculture is really just working with nature and not against it, observing, studying nature, learning how we can mimic it and fold into its flow harmoniously. I really see it as a guide for living in harmony with nature and loosening our grip on trying to dominate it. As humans, that's something that we have a history of wanting and trying to do in all different aspects. It's kind of funny to me when I go back to visit family in the Midwest. They have a very different landscape aesthetic than we tend to embrace more out here in the West. If you've ever heard of a shrub being meatballed, that epitomizes it. Everything is like, oh, there's a plant, I must control it, must put my mark on it, I must, you know, do something to make it other than its natural shape and natural expression. So we want to relinquish that control a little bit, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Okay. So I have 7 permaculture principles I want to talk to you about today. And we're going to do our best to walk through the gardens a little bit and making sure that you also can hear and see what's going on. And we'll probably try to stay more to the main paths because there's so many of us. Thank you all for showing up. Such a lovely day to be here talking about this topic. So relative location, as I alluded to already, relative location is really important in permaculture. Each element on a site is placed strategically so that each element assists each other. And also then every element performs many functions. And I'm going to talk about that more later too. And another term for that is stacked functions. And then also each important function is supported by many elements. Again, I'll go into more of this, so we'll cover it in more detail. Efficient energy planning is an important principle of permaculture, and that's energy of all sorts, like human energy, our efforts and inputs into the garden, and how energy flows through a landscape, how water moves. All of it is energy planning, and we want to be efficient with that so that we can, again, fold into that flow of nature and let it take over so we have less work to do. We want it to do more of the work than we're doing. There's an emphasis on biological resources over fossil fuel resources. The 6th principle is diversity of species to create a productive, interactive system. And the last one is maximizing biomass by layering vegetation in ground covers, herbaceous perennials, shrubs, and trees. So the whole idea behind this talk today is that spring is a really crucial time in the garden, especially for an ornamental permaculture garden or any kind of permaculture garden, because all the planting that's done now really sets the stage for the growing season ahead. And for permaculture, many growing seasons ahead. So it's a really good time to plan and think through the steps you want to take and how you can see how you can implement them through the season and beyond. So the concept of permanent culture, I think it's good to ask, is what we're doing, anything you do in your landscape or your garden, is it in harmony with nature? And I feel like one good litmus test of this is to think through what is going to happen with your site if you left it alone for 10 years. And what's it going to be like if you left it alone for 20 years or 100 years? Are there native plants that can survive on their own without you watering it all the time? Are they going to proliferate? Is it going to look even better because they're going to spread and fill in, and you've created this little oasis because it's harvesting rainwater? And so even without you touching it, it's getting better. That's what we want to do. And that's basically, in a nutshell, the definition of regenerative landscaping, if you've heard that term thrown around. Sometimes regenerative is used synonymously with permaculture. But that is the crux of regenerative. Does your system get better on its own without effort, or does it tend to degenerate or degrade? So along those lines, native plants do enhance natural systems. They support pollinators, habitat for all the ecological members. And we want to design to get nature to do the work for us, as I mentioned, so we can have a light touch after installation. The biggest part of the work should be the planning and the installation. And after that, we really want it to more or less take care of itself. So one example of what we want to be thinking about along these lines is birds. We want to create habitat for birds. Birds are attracted to berries. So you plant things that birds like to eat, and it'll bring them into your landscape, and then they can eat the insects and take care of something that might potentially otherwise be a problem. Now it's a resource for a critter that you want to help prosper, and you might enjoy looking at, and it makes your life better too. So it's everyone benefits. It's a full system. When the ecosystem's in balance, we don't have to be in charge anymore. And then organic materials are another important part that we need to think about in terms of permanent culture. And chemical fertilizers and pesticides are not enhancing the ecology. They're not getting us to that point where we can be hands-off, where it can take care of itself. The same with petroleum products like weed mat and irrigation systems. And we, as a company, are pretty opposed to using weed mat because it is a petroleum product. And guess what? In 10 years, it's still there. Maybe 100 years, I don't know where it would be, but probably microplastics going to be floating around. It's not good for the ecology. So we don't like to do it. Now, I also know we live in a really dry climate, and it can be really hard to get your landscape established without an irrigation system. And sometimes it's the reality of what we need to work with to get something started. So not trying to shame anyone. Don't feel bad about hiring us and asking for it or whatever. We'll have the conversation. But ideally, this is what we want to work for. We can work on it together. And then also sorry, so I have this here. In terms of permanent culture, we want to look at perennial crops. And I I actually would love you all to start thinking about, because I'm going to ask people to chime in a second, about perennial crops that grow here. I'm hoping that we'll have a chance to all walk together that way, like right at the corner of that big brick building, almost right there, there is a little herb garden. And I wrote in my chalk over there, perennial crops. And I was there, I think it was March maybe, and there were a bunch of just itty bitty herbs poking up from the ground, which made me think, aha, these are all perennials. Are not annuals that just got planted here this year because it's way too early. That wouldn't work. So a whole bunch of those, maybe all of them, maybe some. Does Melanie, do you know, Melanie, are they all perennials? Yeah, so pretty awesome demonstration over there if you want to start creating some perennial crops. Herbs are really easy to tuck into an ornamental garden, just here and there and everywhere. A lot of them come from the Mediterranean and like our kind of climate where it is hot and dry, so they can handle that. Some other ones I thought of perennial crops are asparagus. They don't really like our native soils so much, but we can work with that. Raspberries, rhubarb, and who else has some they're thinking of? Strawberries, yeah, that's a great one. Arugula, is that perennial? Oh, wow, that's awesome. I think you're lucky. What? Honeyberries? I don't even know what that is.
It's honeysuckle, edible honeysuckle berry that's about this long, and it tastes a little bit like it's blue, but it tastes a lot like raspberries, so it has more antioxidants.
Wow, awesome. Honeyberries, that's great. And there's choke cherries, choke berries, service berries, elderberries, currants, goji berries.
Horseradish.
Yes, horseradish. Chives, yes. I actually have a funny, actually a really cool thing to just mention about horseradish. Any of you who've been here as long as I have or longer will remember Native Roots Nursery. Used to be over by Bread out on 250, and they planted landscaping all around, and then they moved out of the site. They left, and those plants remained planted there, and no one moved them. And I kept an eye on them for over a year, and it was just like a vacant lot. No one was watering it or taking care of it. Horseradish prospered. It stayed there and kept looking amazing. So if you want a low maintenance dryland crop that you don't have to do anything to, horseradish is your friend. All right. So let's see. Wondering about walking around. I kind of want to get most of my talking done while we're here in this open space, because I'd love to walk through the gardens more, but it's going to be a little bit harder for us to all be in a group where you can hear and see well, I think. So I'll talk a bunch now here, and then we'll do a little walking through once you know more of the gist of what I'm showing you. Sound all right? Okay, so stacked functions. Stacked functions is something that if you only take two things away from what I talk about today, one of them is stacked functions. We'll get to the other one.
What kind of functions?
Stacked, so layered. Yeah. So what we talked about at the beginning, where, let's see, what was the words I used? One of the permaculture principles is every element performs many functions. So we use the shorthand of stacked functions to refer to that. So stacked functions maximize beneficial relationships and efficiency. All right. Every strategy and element in your landscape should perform at least 3 functions, and more is better. So we're gonna walk over here and see how well we fit into this space, and I'm gonna show you a really good example of a stacked function. Let's give it a try. You all can probably stay where you're at if you'd like. I'm just gonna be at this vertical structure here, but come on over if you want to. I think I'm gonna tiptoe through the, where's Melanie? I want permission to step into the bed. Hi, Yael. Okay, can some of you come over this way so that you can hear me? All right, so this structure here provides us a I bet he's leaving for the day. Provides us a perfect example of a stacked function. So it gives us a little separation of space, which I like when I'm looking at designing a garden. It just makes it feel cozier on that side where the bench is. And I don't know if any of you have studied up on landscape design. One of the things they tell you to do is create different rooms in your garden. And so by doing this, it's sort of like creating a room on the other side of that, different from this side. And also a little intrigue, you know, you're over here and you're like, huh, I wonder what that plant is over there. I wonder what's going on over there. And so it makes you want to walk around and go check it out. And it just makes it more interesting than if you can see everything all at once. It's creating some shade for that bench, which is really nice on hot sunny days, right? There's a bunch of roses, climbing roses around the perimeter, and a couple clematis too. And it's providing a trellis for them to climb up, which then also provides more shade, right? Also, when you're sitting on the bench, it's really getting you to look that way at more green space. So especially once the vines are all climbed up, it's going to prevent a visual screen from the parking lot, which is another function that's valuable in the landscape. Well, along the lines of perennial crops, no one mentioned rose hips, but that is a perennial crop. And I don't know if these particular roses have hips or not, but if they do, then that's another function. So this is a really great example of stacked functions. Can anyone think of anything else that this structure is providing as far as stacked functions that I missed? Excellent. Yeah, a windbreak could also be a windbreak. So can you hear okay, or should we go back to where we were away from the machine? Should we go away? Raise your hand if you think we should. Okay, I guess we're fine then. So another thing I wanted to mention, well, I'll finish the stacked functions part first. So the more functions your design freely provides, the richer it all becomes while growing a deeper, more layered beauty. I haven't mentioned beauty yet, but everything that we're doing also creates beauty. You know, the more plants you have, the more biomass, biodiversity, layered vegetation from the tiniest ground covers to the tallest trees, it all enriches our environment and creates more beauty. Which reminds me, how many of you have heard of biophilia? Okay, a few of you. So biophilia is something that we at Columbine talk about a lot because it's really the bigger purpose of the work that we do, I feel. biophilia basically captures that whole idea that you've probably heard about in the news and whatever, about how important it is for us as humans to spend time in nature, because it decreases stress, it increases well-being, it increases focus, and dare I say creativity, all kinds of good things. And so that's all summarized in the term biophilia. And I wanted to remember to tell you that I have some handouts inside, right outside of the meeting room where the Great Garden Series normally takes place. One of them's on biophilia, and there's 3 others also if you're interested. There's also a sign-up list to get our e-newsletter that comes out once a month if you're interested. So another thing I wanted to mention while we're right here that I think is really cool is pertains to how to make your landscape lower maintenance. I think most all of us want that. Even when we design a landscape to be as low maintenance as possible, guess what? There's still maintenance because we're dealing with nature and living creatures. And until we have mastered permaculture, there's going to be maintenance. Even then, there might be some. So anyway, I was walking around with Melanie the other day, who knows everything about Durango Botanic Gardens and is awesome. And she told me about this little Corsican violet. You can see it right in the cracks of the flagstone right here. You can also, if you can look carefully, you can probably glimpse a little purple right against the fence under the rose. It's a little blooming Corsican violet. And the reason that's important, and that I want to point out to you, is that one thing that I've learned myself in my evolution in ornamental horticulture is I used to also want a really tamed landscape. If I put this plant there, by golly, I wanted to stay there. And I didn't want any weeds or anything surrounding it or in the way. I wanted it to stand out on its own and have a little buffer of just plain mulch around it. And that was like with the whole landscape. But again, if we can relinquish some of that control and let nature step in and let plants move themselves around to places where they're happier and where they're going to thrive more and be okay with that, like this little Corsican violet, then we're all better off. I mean, who doesn't want a happier plant? And that one in the cracks that you can actually see, unlike the one hiding under the rose, is really cool. And maybe next year there will be more of them in more places. So if we don't have to weed that out or be frustrated that it moved, I think Melanie said it was originally over here somewhere. If we don't have to be messing with that or even experience that frustration of it moving, we're all better off. So thinking about that kind of approach to your garden is going to make you happier over time, I believe. So the next thing I want to talk about is wise water management. Harvesting rain and organic matter using slight depressions in the landscape is a way to more wisely use our resources that come to us from nature. And I'm going to show you this book that is the Bible of rainwater harvesting. It's by Brad Lancaster, and it's called Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond. And rain harvesting is a facet of permaculture. And in my mind, it's the one that best fits where we live. And I think everyone should be doing a lot of it all the time. So I highly recommend this book. Every time I look at it, I learn something new or remember something I'd forgotten. Even though I took a class, a certification course in 2019, where Brad taught a day of it, and we got to ride bikes around and see all this stuff he'd done and was done in Tucson. And anyway, I still even learn a lot from it, so I highly recommend it to everyone. really great diagrams and really user friendly. And there's stories about things that he's done and experienced and travels he did where he first learned about the methods that he uses. Anyway, excellent book, and I'm done carrying it around for now. So we're going to walk close to that other structure, the wooden one, and look at a rainwater harvesting system. So we'll amble over there, and I'll pause for a moment. Oh, I just was looking and realized I lost that. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You want to leave that book there?
Yeah,
Okay.
I have a friend who's going to grab it for me. Thank you, though.
I have a hearing issue, so you'll find that I try to stay next to you.
Great.
So.
I like it. Cut through here. Excuse me, I'm going to cut through. Aren't those gorgeous? Good to see you. Okay, so this little depression water channel here goes from the top of the site, the highest point, more or less, down to a lower spot. And in the meantime, you can tell it's not just a dry creek bed like tends to be standard in this area. Can everyone hear me? I feel bad people being behind me. Yeah? Okay. There's room on the sidewalk out there, even in the shade, if that's better for you. Do whatever you want to do. So what we want to do with wise water management is to slow the flow of water throughout a landscape. We want to slow it down, and we want to walk it around the landscape as much as possible. So ideally, this might have, come further across and kind of zigzagged back and forth around to really spread the flow of water. But you can see where the cobble is an area where water just moves. That's where it travels, and we're not trying to infiltrate it right there. But then there's these little breaks, and I think it's on the other side of the bridge behind John there too. There's a mulched area, and basically the mulch areas are depressions that are lower than the cobble, what we call spillways, where the water travels. The basins are the mulched areas that act as a sponge, a living sponge. And because they're lower, it helps the water settle there, which we really want it to do so that it has a chance to soak in. Because if it's just traveling, especially with our clay soils, which are described as hydrophobic, they kind of repel water rather than soaking in due to lack of organic matter. The soil's not going to get very wet. I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but I sure have, when it seems like it rains a lot and I'm like, oh, I'm going to go take advantage of all this moisture and weed my garden. And I go out there and I dig under the mulch, and none of the soil is even wet, just the mulch is damp. And so the roots definitely didn't get moist enough to make it easy to weed. So that's just one example that many of you can probably relate to about how the water doesn't soak in a lot of times if you don't provide it more of an opportunity to do that. So this is basically what a rainwater harvesting system can look like, a passive one. I often talk about rainwater harvesting and people automatically think barrels, but this is a better use of our resources. For one, we don't have to use fossil fuels for the plastic container that is the barrel, right? And it's not upkeep and maintenance, and like holding liquid water could get algae or mosquitoes or whatever. This is just passive and working with the flow of nature. So another important thing about wise water management is having our pathways and our hardscapes higher than our areas where we want the water to settle. And that's good for the integrity of the pathway, as well as getting water to the landscape where we want it. And it also helps to keep ice from forming on our pathways in the winter, which is also really nice. So placed and built right, a water harvesting earthwork system can stack many functions. So some of the functions are passively harvesting water, reducing flooding, erosion control, and providing sufficient water for the vegetation around it. That vegetation then can be selected to provide food, herbal medicine, shade, food and habitat for wildlife, as well as for our tamed human lives. So some ways that I like to look at how we can use the vegetation that we grow to help us, other than things we've already mentioned, are thinking about the placement. Like if you have a mock orange, which if you aren't familiar with that shrub, it's a really fragrant shrub when it's blooming. It smells terrific. Or a lilac, if you place them in your landscape way out in the back 40, you're losing out on a lot of the benefit that plant can offer us with its wonderful fragrance. So if you're going to have a plant like that, plant it by your patio or a window you open frequently at that time of year when it blooms, and you'll enjoy it more. And then also with the lavender, my team can tell you that I feel so strongly that lavender, if we're going to bother planting lavender, it has to be along a pathway where someone's going to brush against it and have a chance of actually smelling it. If it's way out in the middle of a bed, you're losing the value of a big part of the value of the plant, in my opinion. It's just like, why bother? So thinking about those kinds of things, again, is permacultural. We want each element to serve many functions, not just beauty, but also the fragrance in this case. And then all these plants that we're talking about as part of the water harvesting system, ideally, we want to be choosing plants that can be they can be happy with just that amount of water they're getting from nature, with the help of the concentration of the water provided by nature into our basins. It really exponentially increases how much we get, but it still doesn't mean that you can really get away with planting plants that, like the New England, for example, because we also go through dry periods where even our basins totally dry out. So we still need to be paying attention to what's going to work for us. Okay, so who can tell me what the term was that I said I want you to take home with you, if nothing else? Yes, stacked functions. Good job. All right, so hopefully you have a much better idea now of what that means and can start looking through that lens at your home landscape when you're thinking about where to put something, a plant or a pergola or a bench or anything, a hot tub, a pathway, all of it. You can think about what functions it serves and how it works with the other elements in your landscape. Okay, here's the other term that I want you to remember, if you remember nothing else: closed loop system. Okay, so a closed loop system, you can think about it in terms of how nature doesn't waste anything. Everything is used. And there's dung beetles, right? In nature, they break down the things that no one else wants. And there's all kinds of critters throughout the ecology that do that sort of function. Or like we talked about, the birds eating the insects that might otherwise harm our plants, that we don't want them doing that. So we want to think about how we can follow suit in our landscapes, how we can make use of what we have and really leverage the things on our site and really minimize what we take off site and haul away and what we bring onto our site, because all of it you know, anytime something comes or goes, with rare exception in our culture, it's done by fossil fuels, with vehicles and things that pollute, the gasoline, the fumes, the exhaust that pollute our environment. And so the more we can get away from that, the better off we all are. So one thing that pertains exactly to the ornamental horticulture landscape world is mulch. So mulch is really important to hold in moisture and deter weeds, and it can also moderate the temperature of the soil, which can make it easier for a lot of plants to live happily. But a lot of times it does come from who knows where, right? Far away. It's trucked in, often in plastic bags that just get thrown away. And so I think that we can do better. And there's a couple ways that I specifically want to encourage you of how we can do better. One way is, if we live in a place that has some trees, we can let the leaves accumulate in our landscape and use those as mulch. That's what nature does. And it's free. And it's from our own site. I was surprised. So, doing landscape work in this community for the last 20 years, we've been hired so many times, especially like out in Edgemont, to rake pine needles. And that's a real thing. And I realize it is a fire hazard, and that's a real deal. And so I was very interested. I went to visit some family in North Carolina last year for the first time. And they have like a service where people come spread pine needles on their landscapes for mulch. I didn't know that was a thing. Some of you probably are like, yeah, of course. But since we've been hired to take them away so many times, it was just kind of interesting to me how different regions can use resources differently and see something as value when we see it as waste. I'm not exactly sure how that could be applied here with the fire dangers. That's something that we all can look into and learn about, if it's applicable at all. I really don't know. I'm not suggesting it necessarily. But just to look at how we can be resourceful that way. Yeah.
Do you have a recommendation on how deep the mulch should be? Because I've heard up to 4 inches.
Yes. When we apply mulch, like this really lovely dark brown mulch, 3 to 4 inches is what is recommended. Anything less than that is purely ornamental as far as we're concerned. It's really not functional. The function of keeping the moisture in and keeping the weeds out. Less than that is just not really doing the job. Betsy, hi.
How far away do you keep it from your plants though? Like you have short plants. I guess, is it like a gradient? Like
Yes.
big spaces can get those 4 inches, and as you get closer, you kind of radiate in.
That's exactly right. Yeah, if you couldn't hear, she wanted to know how close to the plants do you want the mulch? And you do not want mulch right up against the base of your plant. It can rot the stem and the crown of the plant. It holds in too much moisture. So you want it just to gently kind of slope down and directly right around the plant, a couple inches or so around the stem. You want it to kind of be basically bare. Good question. That's a common mistake I see. So if you're doing leaf matter and not this kind of woody mulch, I think you can just kind of work with what you have and what seems right. One of the tricks that I find is that if you have woody matter on the top of your soil as mulch, you don't want to put organic matter on top of it, because the way the soil works is it tries to break down the woody matter. Now that there's the organic matter on top, it's like it all becomes soil, and pretty soon the woody matter is mixed in and it ties up nitrogen in your soil. If any of you have made your own compost and paid it to the point that you paid attention to nitrogen and carbon, you want those balanced. And if there's too much of one or the other, it throws everything off. So this is kind of like that. So basically what I'm telling you is that it's either or. If you want to have the natural vegetation that falls off your plants be your mulch, then do that, but remove or just don't put down the woody kind of store-bought mulch, or else you might have problems with not enough nitrogen. Really important point. So another alternative, though, is what we call living mulch. And maybe we can walk over there. Down around the corner behind the library, there's a place where there's a bunch of, I think it's Turkish Veronica growing. Yes, I have nodding heads. It's Turkish Veronica, and I think it's partly because it's early in the season. It hasn't quite covered the entire area it's in. There's some bare patches, but I expect that plant to fill in and entirely shade the ground where it's growing. And so when it's shading the ground, it's doing all those things this mulch is doing. It's keeping the soil moisture. It's out competing weeds. It's helping to moderate the temperature of the soil. So we can do that in our landscapes everywhere with just planting densely enough is really what the trick is. You can use ground covers, or like we talked about, multiple different layers of different heights of plants. But what we want to work toward is having the ground entirely covered by plant matter, so you can't see bare ground. And another thing that helps with is it's not covered by this kind of mulch then, so there actually is little bits of bare ground there, which supports our ground nesting native bees. That's actually really important, as it turns out. I think it's something a lot of people didn't used to know, but it is important to leave at least a little area of a bare patch from this kind of added mulch. But if you just have plants in there, then it's a happy system and kind of just takes care of itself. So that's living mulch, and that's part of our closed loop system point, where we're wanting, again, the nature to take care of itself. And then if we're not having to import the woody mulch from somewhere else, we're closer to having that closed loop system. Does anyone have questions about that? Yeah.
I just have a comment about the pine needles.
Yeah, please.
I've gotten a small chipper, and I chip my pine needles, and then I put them on my vegetable garden. Like
Oh.
straw.
Has it worked well?
So far, yeah. And there's a bunch of leaves mixed in there, but it makes it like, instead of just having the pine needles, the chipping seems to make this kind of like fluffy thing out of it.
Nice. That's cool. Did everyone hear that? Should I repeat it? Repeat? Yeah, so Betsy was talking about that she got a small chipper and put her pine needles through the chipper along with some leaves, and it's produced this really nice, light, fluffy mulch she uses on her vegetable bed, and it's worked really well. I like that idea. Okay, so ecosystem health is another thing that's important in a permacultural system, and diversifying what we grow is really important. So we want to have, I'm not going to say as much diversity as possible, but maybe. From a design perspective, I also like having groupings of plants instead of just like what I've heard referred to as a horticultural zoo, where you only have one species of every plant there. I think a grouping is visually pleasing, and actually it does serve a good purpose, which is for the pollinators. They can hit a bunch of the plant they're going for really close together. They don't have to go really far out and expend their energy to get to the plants that are blooming at that moment in time. They can just stay in one little grouping. So it does serve a good purpose, but still overall, we want to diversify and have a lot of different types of plants. And honestly, I'm going to use this as one reason that I'm not a huge fan of Russian sage and Karl Forester, and which is an upright ornamental grass all along Florida up there. A lot of you have probably seen it. And catmint, they have their place, but I feel like there's so many of them everywhere that we need to diversify our landscapes more and have more things blooming at different times of the year for the pollinators who need them. And on that note, I want to bring up, on the note of what's best for the ecosystem, I want to talk about bears. I feel strongly that living in bear country, we need to be mindful of planting fruits. And honestly, this is one reason I kind of psychologically stepped away from permaculture a little bit when I first started living here, because I realized I don't think it's environmentally responsible to grow fruit trees in areas where there are bears like my house. I think it's really great for sustainability to grow as much of our own food as possible, but the way I see it is the bears were here first. We need to respect them, and if we grow things that are going to draw them in, they're going to be seen as problem bears, and guess what? They're the ones who lose, and I don't think that's right. So when I do landscape designs or consultations, I frequently talk about this, and I do feel conflicted about it, because again, like, being sustainable and growing our own food is also important to me. I've been told by Durango Nursery that plants like serviceberry and hawthorn and maybe currants attract the birds, but not so much the bears. I'm not sure I believe it entirely, but I want to believe it. So anyway, all that is just to say, be mindful of your choices, with the ecosystem health at the forefront of your mind, to work within a permacultural system. Along those lines, flowers are great food for hummingbirds, as we all know. Perennial flowers are terrific, but also if you're someone who really wants to have a hanging plastic hummingbird feeder, which is petroleum product, right? To feed the hummingbirds, I just want to encourage you to rethink that, because flowers are great. You could do a hanging basket of annual flowers, maybe in the same place as your plastic hummingbird feeder, and it's not going to attract the bears. That's a huge plus of it. Because I went to a talk on bears locally at one point, and someone called that an energy drink for bears. So we want to avoid that. Feeding the birds while the bears are hibernating is a great idea, but while they're not so much. Okay, so observation and design is an important part of permaculture. Begin by observing natural patterns and processes in your garden space, such as sunlight, wind patterns, and water flow. And if you all noticed that little compass out there that I drew, that was why, just to kind of bring in the idea of doing a site assessment and thinking about what direction the wind blows in, where your water flows. In the water harvesting course that me and many of my team members have taken, they talk about how you should really be on a site for a full year before you do probably anything, but this was particular to water harvesting. So before you do water harvesting systems, because then you can really see where the water flows, where it pools, where it settles, where you want it, all these things. And I think it's wise. I think it's not always realistic, but I think it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, the sunlight and wind patterns, we all know those change a lot through the year. So making diagrams or keeping a journal or something can be really wise to have that to draw on throughout the year before your second year in a space implementing some of these systems. And then when you design your landscape layout, you really want to take all those observations into consideration, of course, And also consider factors like your immobile elements, things that maybe this pathway was already in here and you're not willing to part with it. You love it. So you consider that is immobile. So you want to consider that as you're planning. But if it was something you didn't like, then you consider immobile and you can move around it. But you want to look at those elements and your microclimates, soil types, and existing vegetation. I always like to look at what plants are present in a landscape and which ones are doing well. And the ones that aren't doing well, we probably don't want more of. The ones that are doing well, and if the person living there likes it, then maybe we want to consider more of those. So creating systems that are ecologically sound, that provide for their own needs, do not exploit or pollute, and are therefore sustainable in the long term is what we're going for with permaculture design. And the goal is to have thriving landscapes that takes care of itself and of us. Reseeding annuals is something I didn't mention yet, but they're really cool and they can help perpetuate themselves without our work. One of my favorites is the California poppy. It's not quite a native here, but it's not a problematic plant. I mean, sometimes I have seen it grow a lot, but I don't think it's definitely not noxious or any. I've never heard anyone refer to it as a weed unless someone just didn't like it in their space, but I think it's a really good one. And there's a lot of reseeding annuals like that, like Mexican hat is a native plant that we have that reseeds itself. And I don't know if any of you have heard of chocolate flower, but it's a native. And I actually, in my experience, believe it should be treated as a reseeding annual. It's supposed to be a perennial, but here I haven't seen it be. Has it been here, Bill? Have they wintered over? Great.
What is it?
Chocolate flower. Oh, is there?
And I'm not sure if that one reseeded or.
Oh, great. Oh, yeah, right. That's so funny. The tag is right in front of me. I wonder if it was like a subliminal message or something. They're a really cool flower. And they do smell like chocolate. They're like a yellow daisy flower. So if you had like, they probably like it next to the flagstone that holds in heat. If you have a little warmer microclimate, it's great. And otherwise, if it's not perennial, it might sow itself around and find a place it likes better. So that's fun too. But yeah, there's lots of reseeding annuals that you could consider. And let's see, what else was I going to say? Oh, shrubs. Yeah, like I was talking about with meatballing shrubs in the Midwest. It's like when we go to plant shrubs in our landscapes, and what I encourage you all to do is take into account the mature size that the plant gets to, any plant, not just shrubs. But if there's room for the plant to be its full size and get to its full expression where you put it, there's a few shrubs like roses and dogwoods that do better with annual pruning, but there's a lot of shrubs, especially a lot of our native ones, that just don't need a darn thing at all. If they have a damaged, diseased, or what's the other one? Damaged, diseased, or dead branch, especially after winter snow load, that'll happen. That needs to be removed for the health of the plant and for aesthetics. But that's, in my opinion, that's all you should be having to do. If you have shrubs planted in a good place for them, they shouldn't need any more than that. So really low maintenance landscapes work well with permacultural systems. And it's achievable to have your landscape largely take care of itself when you have biodiverse systems with a lot of biomass, like we're talking about the living mulch and all that. Lawns, on the other hand, they're never going to take care of themselves, right? So it's just like such a different type of system. And if you want to remove your lawn, one of my handouts inside is all about how to do it. To me, permaculture is really about finding the human niche. how can we best live within the natural ecology that's here and have the least amount of negative impact and the maximum amount of positive impact. Permaculture sets a really good example and guide for how we can do that. Doing these things now is going to just set you up for the future of your landscape for forever after. So really encourage you to do it. And if you want to ask me questions, stick around, or if you want to do a little tour, I'll walk you around and we can look at some examples of some of the things that I talked about. And also, I wanted to let you know that in July, on July 15th, it's a Monday, I'm going to be giving a talk specifically on rainwater harvesting at the Animas Valley Grange. My talk is called Simple Steps to Maximize Benefits of Rain in Your Home Landscape. Hope to give you some really specific tips. Again, we're going to be outside. We're going to be walking around the site, looking at the roof, looking at the gutters, downspouts, whatever's there, and trying to track the flow of water and see how we could put systems in to maximize the use of that in the landscape. Does anyone have questions right now, right here?
What were you saying that ground cover is? It's going over there. It's not quite in yet.
Oh, that I referred to? Turkish Veronica. Yeah, it looks really lovely. It's in full bloom right now. It's tiny purple flowers. It's just a real low growing ground cover. And it's right next to that on the sidewalk where I wrote with chalk living mulch. So you'll be able to find it.
Do you find, I use thyme a lot, especially the open thyme, and it just spreads, covers the whole area and thrives all through the winter and summer.
Yeah, thyme, creeping thyme works great. There's a bunch of different kinds. There's elfin and woolly and pink chintz is a variety. Yeah, it's great, and it's good for pollinators, and it smells good, and it's just covered like a carpet of purple flowers. Really pretty. And actually it has its flowers at a slightly different time than the Turkish Veronica, so they can be a really nice mosaic planted together in the landscape as a ground cover.
What about ice plants?
Ice plants are great. I actually, in my experience, I found ice plants need a little more water than I want them to need. And I've also seen them be munched on by deer more than I'd like. So I love them, but I haven't found them to be as low maintenance as I want them to be. Yeah, I think some people, they just go gangbusters and do great. And I always test my plants with tough love so that I know what's really hardy. So that might be my problem with the ice plant.
Design a stream as such. Do you put anything underneath it, or you just put the stone down and you're done?
Yeah, the question was about creating a water harvesting earthwork if we put anything underneath. Melissa, do you want to answer this one? She builds them all the time, so I thought I might get her to talk, but no, basically the answer is we don't put anything under them. We sculpt the land according to how we want the water to flow and channel, and we tamp down the soil real good, especially in the spillways, particularly in the spillways and around the sides of the basin. We use a tamper so that it's real firm and in place. And sometimes if what we need to create is a bigger basin that's deeper and has steeper sides, we'll need to armor it with rock around the outside of it. But there's no kind of weed mat, plastic pond liner, anything like that, because we're wanting the water to go into the soil. And it's not gonna that much on the spillways, so we're not really losing that much during that part.
Find, like, soil kind of gets in between the rocks, and just before you know it, all the rocks are covered with debris.
Yeah, she's asking about if the rocks in the spillway get covered with debris from just natural sediment washing down. I mean, honestly, the way that we build them is we don't use cobble like this. We'll use like 1.5 inches or so angular gravel, and I think it does a better job of being big enough it doesn't move with the flow of water, but being small enough it helps to knit together and deter weeds better than what I've seen cobble do. But still, over time, what you're asking can happen. Yeah, we can get some. I mean, tamping down the soil good helps to prevent loose particles filling in the rocky areas, but over time that might still happen. Yeah, good question. Also, another part is putting plants in key areas that can take that alternating wet dry sort of scenario, and but they can help to filter sediment from flowing down the system. Yeah, does that make sense? A lot of grasses are used in Tucson in the examples we saw when we did the course down there. So, yeah. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Is it Jupiter?